things that we constantly talk to God about. And very seldom do we ever think about how great God is or what God expects from us. Very rarely do you ever think, what does God expect from us? And what we think is, we think God, for some reason, we think because God understands in 1 John, he says, if any man sin, we have an advocate with the Father, that God is saying it's okay to sin. But that's not what God's saying. God expects us to sin because He knows that we're flesh. But the Bible says, be ye holy, for I am holy. What God expects us to do is live holy. That's what He expects out of us. And what we think God understands, and we think God's okay with it. Just because God understands the way we are, doesn't mean He's okay with how we are. As a matter of fact, He's completely the opposite. He's not okay with how we are. And what I want to preach tonight is this right here. What does God expect? What does God expect? And Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 5, it's going to start out with some things, what God expects. Now, you young people that's here tonight, how many of you ever heard of Kobe Bryant? Young people are open. I know. Nobody raised their hands about the church. Everybody's heard, most people's heard of Kobe Bryant. I'm going to ask you a question. How many of you kids in here know who the all-time leading scorer in the NBA is? Who do you think it is? Give me a guess. Somebody. Michael Jordan. Good guess, Al. That's wrong.
Will Chamberlain.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He scored more points than anybody, and you guys are sitting here thinking, who is Kareem? I thought he was didn't he blow up the Twin Towers? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. His real name is Lou Alcindor. And he played in the NBA. And the reason I bring him up is because of this. The reason he is the most prolific scorer in NBA history, other than the fact that he played for the Lakers, right, is that he put a lot into it. He loved it. He gave it everything he had. I watched a basketball video one time. He was talking about what he did. He worked 8 hours every day on his shots. And he developed a shot called the sky hook. And it was basically impossible to block. And I mean, he would get the ball in the corner and he would just turn. He could do it left-handed or he could do it right-handed. And he was so tall and his arms so long and so far away from the defense, they couldn't do anything about it. And he wasn't like Shaquille O'Neal, who couldn't shoot a foul shot. Kareem could shoot foul shots. And there wasn't nothing they could do with it. He scored more points than anybody in NBA history. He said this. He said, I work 8 hours a day. He said, I shoot 300 shots this way. I shoot 300 shots this way. He'd shoot 300 foul shots. He'd shoot every shot that he used in a game. He shot it 300 times, 300 to 500, and sometimes even 800 times a day. You say, why? Because he wanted to be the best. He gave it his all. He gave everything to it. And as Americans, we're geared to giving our all to things. We have a career. We think we're going to give our all to that career. We have a job. We want to give it all to that job. That's what we do. We give it everything we've got. And when you give it everything you got, you're talking about sacrifice. You're talking about time. You're talking about effort. You're talking about thinking about it. Your thoughts are on it all the time. You love what you're doing. In baseball, the guy that's got the most base hits that's ever been in Major League Baseball is Pete Rose. And Pete Rose has more hits than anybody in baseball. If a guy comes into the league today and hits 200 hits every year for 20 years or 21 years, he still is not going to break Pete Rose's record. And there's no way nobody's going to do something like that. His record's probably going to be there forever. And what he did was he gave it his all. He loved baseball. He loved it. And he got an all-star game. In an all-star game, you're supposed to just kind of, play best you can do, but don't take it real serious. He ended a guy's career one time in the All-Star game because he hit the catcher because he wanted to win the All-Star game and he was going home. Every time he got a walk, when he standing up to bat and they walked and called ball 4, he sprinted to first base every time. He gave it everything he had. I remember playing a softball game one time. We down to 2 outs, had 1 out left, and we needed a hit, and the guy popped one up real high in the air. And he's like, man, he walked to first base, and the guy dropped the ball. And they threw him out. And we could have won the game. But he was lazy. And when you're going to love something, you're going to give it everything you got. It's love, it's heart, it's soul, it's everything. And that's what people do for sports. And people that watch it, they'll give everything for sports. They'll pay any amount of money to go see sporting events. And you see these guys, that's what they are. And here's what God expects from you. He expects your all. He's not okay with you giving everything you got to this world and not giving it to Him. He's not okay with that. Does He understand it? Yeah, He understands we're flesh. But He's not okay with it. He's not okay with it. Deuteronomy chapter 6, look at verse 5. He says this. He says, "And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy might. And these words which I command thee this day shall be in thine heart. Thou shalt teach them diligently unto thy children, and shalt talk of them when thou sittest in thine house, and when thou walkest by the way, and when thou liest down, and when thou risest up." What's he talking about? What's coming out in his heart all the time is, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, with all thy soul, with all thy might." You know what He expects you to do? He expects you to love Him with everything you have. And He's not okay if you don't.
Right. He's
not okay if I don't. Look at chapter 11, Deuteronomy chapter 11. I'm going to go through this. And the reason I want to go through these verses is to show you that it's not just one time that He just happened to put it. If it's in there one time, it'd be good enough.
Yep.
But I just want to show you the importance that He puts on it. Deuteronomy 11, verse 1, He says, "Therefore, thou shalt love the Lord thy God, and keep His charge, and His statutes, and His judgments, and His commandments always." He says, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God." Look at verse 13. "And it shall come to pass, if ye shall hearken diligently unto my commandments, which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God, and to serve Him with all your heart, and with all your soul." What does God expect? He expects your all. He expects everything you have. Just like those ball players give you know why they succeed? You know why they excel? Because they give it everything they've got.
Right.
And it's for nothing. It's nothing. You guys didn't even know who Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was. All that stuff for nothing. Nobody even knows who he is anymore. It's for nothing. Pete Rose ain't even a Hall of Fame because he bet on baseball games. It's nothing.
Yeah.
God said this. He said, "I want you to give me everything you got." Look at verse 22. He says, "For if ye shall diligently keep all these commandments, which I command you to do them, to love the Lord your God, to walk in all His ways, and to cleave unto Him, then will the Lord drive out all these nations from before you, and ye shall possess greater nations and mightier than yourselves." You see, what we do is we go to God. We're constantly going to God and saying, "I want you to fix this. Lord, I want you to fix my wife, God. She just don't treat me the way she's supposed to." And God's looking at you thinking, or looking at me thinking, "Look at how you treat me. Look at how you treat me." And I'm going to show you, God thinks that way. If you think that God don't compare you to how you think about other people, on how you think about Him, I'm going to show you. He does. Look at chapter 19, Deuteronomy chapter 19. Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 9. He says, "If thou shalt keep all these commandments to do them, which I command thee this day, to love the Lord thy God, and to walk ever in His ways, then shalt thou add 3 cities more for thee besides these 3 cities." Look at chapter 30, Deuteronomy chapter 30. God is serious about you giving Him everything that you have. In Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 6, He says, "And the Lord thy God will circumcise thine heart, and the heart of thy seed, to love the Lord thy God with all thine heart, and with all thy soul, that thou mayest live." He said, not only do I want you to do this, I want you to teach your kids this.
Yeah.
To love me with everything they've got. I want you to think about it when you're getting up in the morning, when you're laying down at night, when you're doing it during the day, when you're inside your house. I want you to think about this. You need to love me with everything you've got. Look at verse 16. "And that I command thee this day to love the Lord thy God, to walk in His ways, to keep His commandments, and His statutes, and His judgments, that thou mayest live and multiply." Look at over another book. Go to Joshua. In Joshua chapter 22. After Moses dies, Joshua becomes the preacher. In Joshua chapter 22, he's preaching. This is what he says. In Joshua 22, verse 5. He says, "But take diligent heed to do the commandment and the law which Moses the servant of the Lord charged you, to love the Lord your God, and to walk in all His ways, and to keep His commandments, and to cleave unto Him, and to serve Him with all your heart, and with says this, take good heed therefore unto yourselves, that ye love the Lord your God. Go over to Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. God's interested about you giving Him everything, all day long, and when you don't, He's not okay with it. The point I'm trying to get to you this night is this. We look at things in a warped way. We look at things in a way that's us. If I'm going to have a God, I want to know what He's going to do for me. If I'm going to ask God something, I want to know what He's going to do for me. If I want to do something, I want to see how it's going to work out for me. And we have that selfish attitude. And what we do when we go to God, we show that attitude. Matthew chapter 22, look at verse 36. Matthew 22, 36. Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. He's interested. That's Jesus talking. He's interested in you loving Him with everything, giving Him everything you have. Giving Him all of it. Look at Mark chapter 12. Get Mark chapter 12. Mark chapter 12, look at verse 30. Look at 29. It says, And Jesus answered him, The first of all the commandments is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. That's what we read at the start. Deuteronomy 6:5, what he just said there is Deuteronomy 6:4. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. This is the first commandment. And the second is like, namely this. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. There is none other commandment greater than these. The greatest commandment in the Bible is for you to give everything you have, everything about you to God. All of it. And look at Luke chapter 10. Luke chapter 10. Chapter 10, verse 27. It says, And he answered and said, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself. And God's interested in this part right here. He's interested in you, giving Him everything you got. And title of this message is, What does God expect? He expects your all. He expects everything you have. In other words, if you've got pride, He expects you to drop it for Him. You know, there's a place over there in the Bible where it says that they come to the altar to lay something down. And the Lord, you know what Jesus said? He said, Go get right with your brother. And then come up here and start trying to get right with me. And you know what we do? We forget verses like that. We let verses like that go out. We try to pretend like we got a relationship with God, but yet we got people that we're bitter at, people that we're mad at, got problems between us and all those things. And you know what we do? We pretend like that the verse about God saying, hey, you go get right with your brother first, then come up here, ain't in the Bible. It is in the Bible. It's in the Bible. And God understands our flesh. But get this, He's not okay with our flesh. He's not okay with us not getting right with a brother. Well, brother, you just don't understand. Listen, God said, get right with your brother first. It don't matter what he did, what she did, what was said, who said what, who's hurt your feelings in church, who's hurt my feelings in church. It does not matter. God said, I want you to get right with your brother first, then come and get down at the altar, and then you can do something. Until then, forget it. And what we do is we pretend like verses like that's not in the Bible. God said, I want you to love me with everything you got. When you get up in the morning, I want you to be thinking about me. When you go to bed at night, I want you to be thinking about me. And what we do is we have all of our ideas about life, what we want, our house, our home, our cars, our possessions, everything that we have. God, work it out. God, work it out. God, work it out. I just don't understand why God ain't working. He don't understand why we ain't giving Him everything we got. Sure. And He's looking at us and He's just thinking, why won't you love me with everything I've ever done for you? Why don't you give me everything you got? Secondly, look at Malachi chapter 1. Malachi chapter 1. God wants your best. God wants your best. And what we do as Christians I'll tell you what we do. We give God what's left over. That's what we do. We give God what's left over. When it comes to our time, what's left over, we give to God. Well, God, I got a job. Well, I got to run the kids to ball games. I've got to make sure to get my garden planted. Got to make sure I got all these things. I got my hobbies that I'm going to do. I got all this stuff. Everything I'm going to do. And then, God, I got a few hours at night before I fall asleep in the bed. I'm going to pray, or I'm going to read my Bible, or whatever. We give God what's left over. When it comes to what are you going to give to God? When it comes to time, it's what's left over. When it comes to money, it's what's left over. When it comes to our pride and all those things that keep us from doing, our fear, all those things. You know what? There's people say, I am too afraid to ever witness to somebody. But yet they'll go to college and they'll stand up in front of a bunch of people they don't know and give a speech. Because why? They got to have grade. Yeah. I'll just grin and bear it and get through it. Got to have a grade. God bless me getting up here and sacrificing what I'm doing to get a grade, even though I won't go sacrifice for you and do it. Yep. And that's what we'll stand up in front of people and give a speech at work that we don't want to do because we want our job. And I'm going to tell you something. God notices. If you think that God don't sit there and think, man, you're worried more about your grade than you are witnessing to me, then you're deceived. Because God looks at those things. He looks at them. Look at Malachi chapter 1, verse 8. He says, and if you offer the blind for sacrifice, is it not evil? And if you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it now unto thy governor. Will he be pleased with thee, or accept thy person, saith the Lord of hosts? Does that sound like somebody that's okay with whatever you got left over to give him? It's not. Amen. And the thing that I want to stress to you tonight, guys, listen, young people, is this. God is not okay with just whatever you got. God is pretty impressed with himself. And he ought to be. And he believes that he ought to just get some sacrifice. And he ought to get some praise and some honor. And he ought to have your best. That's what he thinks. God expects the best you got for him. Amen. You know what they used to say, the old-timers? And I know the old-timers, they doctrinally, they didn't have it as good as we did. They're probably all millennial. But you know what they did on Sundays? They wore their Sunday best. Wonder why? Because they were going to church. They're going to church. They wanted to give God the best that they had. Now, whatever your best is, that's okay. That's okay, but just make it your best. And God says this. He says, you're going to offer me blind? You know, I got to have a sacrifice for the Lord. Well, I got that old cow over there. It's got the mange. You can't see out of one eye. I'm blind in the other one. Let's bring that over here. Hey, let's give this to the Lord. Y'all say, oh, brother, I wouldn't. That's what we do. We give him what's left over. And we gripe and complain about how bad our life is. And then when it comes to God, when we're going to give him something, we just give him whatever's left over. And we bring this thing in here, and that's what he's saying. You're going to give me blind? He says, you're going to give me something that's lame, that can't walk? He says, you're going to give me something that's sick? He says, offer that to your governor. You think he don't notice how we treat big-time officials? We get the senator comes in here, boy, we're all, hey, how you doing, sir? How are you? How are you? Nice to see you, sir. All this stuff, we act different around big politicians. You let somebody have some money, you know how people do. People act different around people that's got money than they do regular folks. Somebody's got a lot of money, they act different to them. They feel inferior to them. You know what God's doing? He's sitting there and he's looking at this situation. He's saying, you don't give that guy that much respect? And you won't even talk to me at night? And you won't even read my Bible? Right. And then you want me to answer your prayer? Yeah. See, that's the way God thinks. You say, Jack, look, he's the one that said that. Look what he says. He says, offer that now unto thy governor. He's comparing himself there. He's saying, look, this is what you do for your governor. This is what you do for a senator. This is the way you treat your principal. This is the way you treat your teachers. This is the way you treat your politicians. And yet with God, we just act like it's no big deal. God will understand. He understands how we are, but he's not okay with it. You know what he wants? He wants your best. He compares us to how we treat others. He compares us to how we treat our kids. Well, I'll give everything I got, make sure my kid gets to a ball game. I'll give everything I got, make sure my kid's got enough money for this tomorrow at school, or for this, or for that. money constantly for my kids, and I'll make sure my kids got this, and I just take for my kid for this. You know what Jesus said? He said, unless you hate your father and your mother and your brother and your sister and your wife or your husband, you ain't worthy of me. You ain't even worthy to talk to me. Whose attitude is that? That's God speaking. That's His attitude. And yet we'll give our life over for our kids. And then we'll go to bed at night without even reading our Bible or praying or witnessing or talking to somebody about the Lord. Yeah. And that's just the way. And anybody that's ever coached, anybody that's ever done anything over somebody else, you know what you want from them people that you're over? You want it all. You want everything that you want their best. You want it all. Look down at verse 6. The next thing God expects. He expects your honor and your fear. He says this, a son honoreth his father and a servant his master. If then I be a father, where is my honor? That's God talking. Yeah. He's talking to you tonight. He's saying, you say I'm your father. Where's my honor at? Where's my honor? You know what he says? He says, honor them that deserve honor. That's what he says. If somebody deserves honor, give them honor. He says, you're saying I'm your father. Where's my honor at tonight? You know what we expect out of our kids? To honor us. What do we mean by that? Obey us when we obey us the first time. Yeah. We say, I want you to do this. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. I go do it. I'm doing it. That's what we expect. And if it's not happening, then we go to God and we say, God, help my kids to obey. God, they're not doing like I want them to do. But yet God's sitting here saying, you call me a father? Where's my honor? That's what God's saying. He's saying, where's my honor? Look what he's saying. Look what he goes on to say. He says, where is my honor? And if I be a master, he's talking about a servant as master. And if I be a master, where is my fear? Saith the Lord of hosts unto you. You know what he's saying? A servant and a master. You know what goes on with a servant and a master? When the master says you go, there's a place over there in that Bible that says you're masters. He says, how many of you as a master, when you've got a servant that comes from the field, he's been working all day, and you've been at home, he's been slaving to the bone out in the field, and he walks in. How many of you don't look at that servant and say, hey, go ahead and fix my food first, and then you can fix you something to eat? And you know what he's saying? I'm your master, and all you're worried about is feeding your face, and you're never worried about doing anything for me. And it's always, well, so-and-so done me wrong, and, well, I just ain't going to go to that church no more. And, well, you know, you'll be witnessing to people and say, oh, I'm going to church. Well, not because of hypocrites. Well, you go to work, don't you? Yeah, ain't there hypocrites there? Well, that ain't the same. Well, of course it ain't the same. You got to have a check. The reason that we're in church tonight is because, it's not because you're going to get a paycheck tonight. Yeah. You ain't getting no pay. At least I don't think you are. If you are, let me know how this works. You're not getting a paycheck. You don't have to be here. You're not going to get fired if you don't show up. You know what God says? I'm a master. You're a servant. He says, that's what you say I am. He says, where's my fear? Why are you not afraid to live the way you live, Jack Butts? Why ain't you afraid to live that way? Why do you talk the way you talk? Why do you say the things that you say? Are you not afraid of me? The Bible says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And you know what we do? We believe God is just okay. God's okay with us gossiping about other people. God's okay with us getting mad at somebody and quitting church, or going to quit Sunday school teaching, or going to quit VBS, or going to quit the camp, or going to quit whatever it is. Why is it when somebody gets mad, God's the one that has to do without? You know, God may be just like, well, why don't you go say something to them? Why are you quitting me for? God's got a job He's wanting to get finished. And He's got here in Malachi, and He's saying this. He's saying, you say I'm a father, where's my honor? You say I'm a master, where's my fear? God's saying that to you tonight. Are you afraid of God enough to quit sinning? That's the question. Sure. And I'll tell you, God looks at it. You know what we do? We'll say something that God does not want us to say. And we'll stand in front of our boss, and we'll want to tell him off, and we bite our tongue. But then when we spout off against something that we ain't supposed to be doing for God, we say, well, that's just the way I am. I can't help it. You can help it when you get ready to lose your job. You can help when you get ready to lose your job. And see, that's the way we are. We will give respect to somebody else. When I was in the military, when I was in the military, I went to basic training. And when I got to basic training, we went to this thing called the reception station. And you just went in this room, and everybody was just chilling out, having a good time, and laughing and joking, everything's going on. Well, after 3 days, we went and got our shots, got our hair cut, and all this stuff, got our clothes. I mean, we're standing in line, joking around. Everybody's just, I mean, when you're in line, everybody's all messed in a big mass. I mean, it's just hilarious. It's just a big joke. Everybody's a big joke. Well, after 3 days, your drill sergeants come to pick you up. And life, as you know it, is over. You've got a duffel bag that weighs about 7,000 pounds. And you pick this duffel bag up, and your drill sergeant comes in there, and he starts hollering. Whoever they tell you, okay, you're with Company A, 3rd Battalion, 26th Infantry, whatever. You're over here. This drill sergeant comes in, he says, I want this group of people over here now. And so what happens is everybody starts running over there. As soon as they get over there, they drop their duffel bags, and he starts hollering, who told you to drop your duffel bags? Everybody picks their duffel bags up. He says, who told you to pick up your duffel bags? And you're thinking, you don't know what to do. And the last thing you're going to do is look at that guy and say, who do you think you are? You know why? Because you're scared to death. And it's funny as you get on through life, in the military, you start talking about the basic training, you start hearing these guys talk. I'll tell you what I told my drill sergeant one time. Yeah, I know what you told him. Yes, sir. Yes, drill sergeant. You know what you do? They taught you what the rank were. And if you seen anybody that had any kind of rank, man, you're sitting here, you're trying to salute off. You don't know how to salute. You're saluting officers. Anything that shines, you know it's an officer. That's all you know. It's an officer. You're walking out there and you sit and you're trying to, sometimes I saluted somebody left-handed one time. I was so scared. There was a captain walked through, and they never walked through there. He took a shortcut through our area. And I'm standing there, and everybody's coming to attention. I looked to see that. I jumped up and I went left-handed. And he stopped and went, wrong hand, son. Didn't know what I was doing. It's fear. It's a shame that I would give this guy that I don't even know who he is. It's just 2 bars on his hat. I give him more respect than I do God. I get mad at somebody and smart off to him, gossip about somebody. So I tell you about so-and-so. Yeah, so-and-so, you know how he is. He got up, she got up. There's no fear. And we think God's okay with it. God's not okay with gossip.
Right.
He's not okay with backbiting. He's not okay with halfway doing something. He's not okay with Sunday school teachers, me included, coming in halfway prepared and just winging it. Getting something together Sunday morning, trying to, I'll get this together, and then trying to just throw something together. I said, well, he's not okay with that. He wants our best, and he deserves our best. He wants our honor, and he wants our fear. Yeah. That's what he wants from us. Like I was talking about going street preaching with Brother Allen. He don't want me to go street preaching and not be prayed up. He don't want me to go street preaching and not been to the altar, confess my sins. He don't want me to go street preaching and not being prepared in my